Right, so we're all set. We have the attendees here, participants, and we're all set whenever you're ready.
Okay, go for it.
All right. All right, so this is the October 14th Board of Zoning Appeals workshop. We're going to be discussing the upcoming agenda for the 28th of October meeting. So for new business, we have the following. The first case is going to be 1415 Washington Avenue. The area variance being requested here is a 107-foot front setback, where 10 feet is the maximum permitted. And this is a location over by SUNY Albany. It's in a mixed-use community urban zoning district. Right behind it is an industrial district, and campus institutional is in front of it. This is a overall overview view of the current existing structure, and this is what would be proposed. And the area variance setback, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but it's right here, this area here. It's just a viewprint of the parking that would go underneath the structure. And this is a proposed setback from Washington Avenue. And the view from within the property from the site, looking out onto Washington Avenue. So for the variance review criteria, the board is considered or required to consider whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties will be created by granting the variance, whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than the area variance, whether the requested area variance is substantial, whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district, whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, which consideration shall be relevant to the decision of the BZA, but shall not necessarily preclude the granting of the area variance. So for the first category, character of the neighborhood, the applicant was asked to demonstrate how the proposed parking would be in character with surrounding properties, and the applicant provided a list of buildings along Washington Avenue, starting at 1365 up over to 1475, of structures and their setbacks from the right-of-way. And the applicant indicated that the average setback was 105.4 feet, whereas the applicant was proposing 107 feet. Of note, of the list given, I believe only two of them, 1385 and 1475, were projects that may have been done under the current USDO. And of those two, only 1475 is compliant. And the reason for the non-compliance for this is explained further under the alternatives considered. So the applicant indicated that compliance is not possible due to a 15-foot wide sewer easement across the frontage, and also there is an archaeological easement. So in this image here, you can see in the blue is the sewer, the 15-foot wide sewer easement that the applicant was referring to, and in red is the archaeological easement that runs through the front setback of the property or the frontage of the property. So the applicant indicated this results in about a 2,884 square foot of area detached from the proposed site plan, which is this shaded in green here. And in order to meet the front setback requirements, they would be required to place a principal use here. So an accessory use couldn't be forward of the principal structure, so it would have to be a principal use, so another primary structure, which they indicated would be not economically feasible without financial hardship and practical difficulty. So they placed the structure as close as they could, or in assuming the easements and assuming that they would not make use of this green area here to build upon. And this is just a more detailed shot of that, and zoomed out a little bit so that you can see the front setback line here. So this is the lot line down here, and then 10 feet for where the building would be required to be is here, and the archaeological easement here and the sewer easement here, showing that it would not be possible to place the structure over those areas.
What is the nature of the archaeological easement? I haven't seen these before.
Yeah, but I think there's a historic rail line that was there, where the archaeological easement is currently overlaid. I think you can see it better in this one, but it runs across the property towards like where the Dunkin' Donuts goes.
And is there's a title holder to the easement? I'm just not familiar with these types of easements. I mean, I'm familiar with utility or preservation easements, but this is a whole different element.
I'm not sure. I can definitely get that information. Erin Glennon is our preservation planner, and she has, I think, more accurate information as to how this impacts the construction on the lot.
Because I just would like to know the limits of development over I mean, if it's intended to be just left as overgrown, I mean, that's just a question as to what limiting factors are placed upon the site by that easement.
I haven't seen the easement, so I can't answer that specifically, but we did get a review of this project planning board, and this is part of the first railroad line that was built in New York State. Apparently there's not much of it left anywhere. The retaining wall, I believe, is the only portion of the railroad that is still extant today. But this is also part of the Upper Washington area historical district. So I would imagine that the archaeological easement is, it definitely has to do with the historic district, and it probably, relates to preserving this last section of the first railroad in the state that doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious if OPR, their staff has weighed in about this in the SHPO review process and what that might look like.
Yeah, I think the same question that Martin asked. It says on this map that it's a permanent easement. Who declared it permanent?
Yeah.
At the planning board, we were just looking at this as a concept review so far. So like I said, I haven't seen the easement. I don't have any more information at this point, but
okay.
Yeah,
So,
just
these are good questions.
new ground.
Yeah, Luis, if you could ask the applicant in between now and the hearing, under what authority it was declared a permanent easement, that would help, I think, for our deliberations.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's we've done a couple of reviews for projects within this area, and this is the first time this easement has been brought up. It's just a kind of interesting that it's here and no other places if it's part of a linear rail line or the infrastructure that supported that rail line.
It's true, we did have two projects from this picture to the left of it.
Yeah,
where this was never mentioned.
I think as Amy was saying, it has something to do with the retaining wall being the last portion of it that remains.
Interesting.
So for substantiality, the applicant was asked to demonstrate why the requested variances is not substantial or contextually significant deviation from the prevailing regulation. The applicant indicated that the 107-foot front setback is a substantial departure from the 10-foot requirement. However, contextually, if you consider the areas where the structure cannot be placed, the setback is not a significant deviation, and they're referring to placing the structure as forward as they could once considering the easements. Impact on environment. The applicant was asked to describe potential environmental impacts that alternatives considered and the proposed project would have on the environment. And the applicant indicated that there was no demonstrable difference on an impact on the environment between a compliant project and the project as proposed. And the applicant indicated that the lot dimensions and easement were created in 1997 when there were no front setback requirements, and the resulting ordinance changing in 2017 would have created a difficulty when you consider the easements. So the applicant is indicating that it would be not a self-created difficulty.
Okay. Are there any questions from the board?
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the area of the easement. I can see it on their site plan cut sheet where there's a connection between the facility and Washington Avenue. And there's a road that looks like it's going to be constructed not only to the service road, but also into Washington Avenue. So it looks like that easement runs the length of the property behind what is currently Dunkin' Donuts. I just want some clarity on where from this site plan, where the easement is. And is that the only part of the property where there's actually disturbance in the easement? Just wrapping my head around that would be good to get an understanding of.
Okay, well, I'll get more information on that for the meeting.
Okay.
You're on mute, Denard.
So can I ask this? I want to ask a silly question. It's really about definitions. Like I understand that this structure is going to be student housing. And so it's kind of a dormitory, but is it really a dormitory, or is it like an apartment complex that's student housing? So like by the definition, this is like a legal question, I guess. By the definition of dormitory, is this a dormitory or is it an apartment complex?
I believe those are two distinct uses in the USDO. I can pull up the definitions real quick. So dormitory
is conditional, and a multi-dwelling is permitted. I'm curious to understand, like, which is this? What is this project really?
Mm-hmm. I believe that the ordinance defines it. Let's see. Sleeping rooms, use of one or more persons, provided there's at least 150 square feet of floor space for the first occupant, 100 additional square feet of floor space for each additional occupant. Total habitable area. So I think it refers more to like cohabitated areas that have maybe shared common spaces. Whereas if you have just dwellings, but they're aimed towards students, marketed towards them, then I don't believe that I don't think that it would fall under the dormitory category for classification under that definition. Then it would just be dwellings, but they would be geared towards students.
Yeah, would somebody need to be enrolled at the university in order to live here? I mean, that to me is the defining characteristic of dormitory.
Well, if they were, if it was a requirement, then it would fall under a dormitory as each person residing in a living unit. The definition indicates that they would need to be duly registered in an accredited school, college, or university.
Right. That's what I was saying.
Yeah. So if in fact it was a requirement of enrollment or of living there, then the usage could be argued that it would be dormitory.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's my question. I'm still not sure that I'm clear on the answer. So I understand the whole, if the person is enrolled in school, so like, is it they have to be enrolled in SUNY because it's across the street from SUNY, or could someone from St. Rose live here as well because it's student housing, as long as they're enrolled in college? So that's what I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand, is it actually a dorm, which functions, in my opinion, slightly differently than an apartment complex? What the application says it's going to be. I'm just trying to understand like what it's really going to be. That's it.
I can ask for clarification from the applicant. If there's, is there a way that you wanted me to kind of point that for the setback?
No, it's fine. It's just this is just my own curiosity. I mean, I don't think that it really because both leases are allowed. I'm just trying to understand for my own intellectual curiosity. That's
Okay.
all.
Yeah.
We talk a little bit about the principal structure being located within a compliant right-of-way and setback, or within a compliant setback. The applicant put on the record that it wouldn't be possible due to financial constraints. Are they, so I would just like to see the record supplemented with what that reasoning was. Is it a matter of locating utilities? Is it design of the building? Is it the fact that it has to be built in a part of the site which is not suitable for construction? That needs to kind of be teased out. Or unless I'm misunderstanding that, the reasoning on the location of the principal structure.
Yeah, well, the explanation given was that the building in the green area here would have, any building there would have to be a principal use, and so it would have to be related to their current principal use, or that, that's an assumption. So to build a principal structure to fill this area in here to meet the setback requirement is the part that they're saying would be economically not feasible and of a practical difficulty. Because it would have to be like a principal use, so a dwelling structure, for example.
So in this particular area, like let's, if we could, because it's just difficult to get my bearings on that particular element. Is it okay if I share if you allow me to share my screen and I can point at the area I'm looking at?
Yeah, let me see.
Okay.
I think that you should already have that ability. You should be okay to share.
Let's see. It says host is disabled screen sharing. Maybe you want to turn it back on.
I think you should be able to do it now, Martin.
Ah, here we go. All right. So can folks see the site plan here?
Yes.
Buildings are represented. Okay. My Zoom is covering up, so I'm going to move that. Can people see my cursor?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the area that I'm looking at, and I think that's the area you're talking about in green, but I'm a little confused as is to this area here, where if I can zoom in, hopefully it'll track with me. Here's the archaeological easement, my understanding. And this is that green area, which they communicate that they cannot build a secondary structure, correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Because my question was, why can't this structure be brought closer to compliance with the road? I understand the easements here, they're already doing disturbance, but within this archaeological easement in this area, there's also existing structures like that retaining wall or some sort of evidence of that historic railroad that prevent them from constructing this building to comply with the setback?
Correct.
Okay. And there are, okay, to construct the building here would be cutting off the road. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Just getting context on that was helpful.
This is also it's a really strangely shaped lot. I think that's part of why it's confusing.
Hmm.
Oh, I see. Yeah, the retaining wall is, okay. Now I'm getting my bearings. Thanks for indulging me there.
Okay. Are there any further questions from the board?
Just out of curiosity, I mean, that retaining wall is there. Is that just for the sake of a question that the applicant may want to talk about as far as a benefit, whether their plan is to expose or be able to provide some sort of access to that as a matter of, now it just seems like it's overgrown, right? So is that something that they're going to improve the aesthetic of? Or, I mean, we have this buried asset that says you can't build over this or disturb it. Is that just going to be the permanence of that particular asset? That's,
At the planning board, it was suggested that they were going to, clean up the overgrown vegetation and highlight the historic nature of the
it
area.
just seems to me, you're making a case like I can't do something because of X, and then nobody can ever, if nobody's going to see X, then why was it built this way? Oh, we have this historic asset here. Well, where is it? Oh, nobody's cleared it up. It just seems kind of strange to me. That would be the case. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think your question, Martin, is can the planning board condition their grant of this use, this project, upon some duty to tend and upgrade the easement?
Yeah. I mean, I understand frustration with buried stuff, but let's put some sunlight on it so people actually have some sense of enjoyment, or tie it back to the history that clearly I'm not even, I mean, I knew the rail line was there, not in that particular spot. I knew the first railroad, one of the first rail lines in the United States between Albany and Schenectady. But beyond that, like, where was it? I don't know. So it's just something anyway. Sorry to steal time.
Anyone else have any questions on this project?
I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm stuck on this whole definition of the building. Are they gonna, and I know this is about like the setback, but have they given any specs in terms of the like room size? Like, I guess where I'm going with this is I'm thinking of, if it is a multi-purpose dwelling, but not technically a dorm, I think that the parking situation is off, because I think that there's a difference between the number of spots you have to provide for a multifamily versus a dormitory. And so I just want to make sure that this meets the definition of a dormitory. I don't know why I'm like beating this horse. Maybe it's just like I'm tired, like after a long day. But
that's a good reason.
I can the applicant.
Due diligence.
Yep, the applicant is in the among the participants. If you wanted, I can unmute the applicant to try to address that.
Yeah, they can address it at the public hearing. I think what might be useful now is if the council can examine this and give us some guidance on whether it is one or the other, in council's opinion. And we can ask those questions when we get to the hearing.
Right. They're also looking for a variance for parking?
No.
No. Okay. I thought I saw that in one of their letters.
It was originally in the application.
Okay.
The determination was that the parking was not going to be required because it was underground. It wasn't considered surface parking as a result. So that the parking variance was not required.
Okay.
Okay. If there are not any further questions, if you can just reach out to the applicant, Luis, and Amy, if you can just take a look at that and give us an opinion, that would be very helpful.
Okay, so the next application is for 255 to 271 Clinton Avenue. The applicant is Home Leasing. The variance being requested here is a variance to allow 38 parking spaces, where 3 parking spaces would normally be the maximum permitted. This is the site location at the intersection of Clinton Avenue and Lark Street. The zoning, the property in green and orange represents the lots that are being considered here, and the Surrounding uses are mixed-use neighborhood edge, some residential multifamily, and residential townhouse in purple. This is an overview of the properties, of all the properties, except the last two at the end would not be considered part of it. So it would start over here with the entrance and go down the street that way. It's another view of it. Entrances on either side. And this is a overview of the site plan. The entrance would be here on Clinton Avenue with 38 spaces coming down and around the buildings. So the applicant was asked to demonstrate how the transparency, or not the transparency in this case, the parking rather, would be in character with the surrounding properties. The applicant provided a list of 7 properties, 360, 104, 264, 327, 196, and 383 Clinton Avenue, which all had parking lots on them. If you want, I can go through the applicant's documentation to go through each one of those. But those were
just whether those lots were constructed in our current zoning or prior zoning, and what the residential use is for or what the use of those particular parcels were.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think any of those were in our current ordinance.
This parking lot seems to be is this parking lot strictly associated with those particular buildings that are in the development?
Yes. Do you mean if the parking lots that they have are for those specific property addresses?
Right, and for no other purposes?
I believe so. I can look at the. Okay, let me just pull it up right here.
I mean, we're not looking at constructing. The application isn't for a public lot; it's for a private lot associated with this, the residents of these buildings only.
Okay, that's I don't know whether or not if they are all connected to a specific structure, or whether they are standalone lots. I can determine that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine they have to be connected because otherwise it would be a separate use. I mean, right? I mean,
Right.
Well, let's back up a little bit, Martin.
Yeah.
So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 properties with parking, do we have any knowledge whether any of them were done legally with permits and variances or other approvals?
I don't have that information, but I can obtain that.
Yes, please. That would be instructive. And then the question that Martin is asking is, what's the requirement for parking spaces, the number of parking spaces for the number of units that the applicant is proposing to build?
I can pull that up for 1 sec. Okay, so I believe these are all townhouses. If not, let me see. I can find that information out for you.
Okay, because he's doing 6 properties for this development.
Okay.
And if they're all 3 units, that's 18. So he's looking for.
Oh, right. So the reason for the lot configuration and the variance being requested was that the project as a whole was needed to be considered individually, and as a result, they would not be able to consolidate the lots because it would change the way that their package was or their financial application was packaged.
Okay.
So the applicant indicates, for example, given was a state historic tax credit, and the IRS reviewed the parcels individually. So to combine them could negatively affect their ability to obtain that financing or their strategy to complete the project.
Just to get back to my question, if they're considered individually, they would have by the code a certain number of parking spaces that could be, at least in theory, constructed with space for each unit. If you're looking at it as a whole project, there's a certain number of spaces that could be constructed. And what are those numbers? Because it looks like they're exceeding that.
Okay.
Yeah, because I when it says 3 to 38, I'm just confused as to with this number of units being redeveloped, where we get that 3 from, and then how the applicant demonstrates going to 38 by the size of the project. I think it's fair to us to look at it from both perspectives and be able to determine what the ask is under the normal circumstances and the circumstances they're presenting. Because certainly they view this as an entire redevelopment project, and there's some gray area between how this is being reviewed by the board as far as what the law requires us to review it as a number of individual projects with an exceedance or a variance for an entire development project. I'm kind of scratching my head on this.
Right. It would appear that, I believe, and I have to confirm, but according to the narrative here, the applicant is indicating that between 255 and 273, the required parking by unit would require or have a total maximum permitted of 38 if you consider a 15% administrative adjustment that could, or I believe administrative adjustment that the planning board could allow. So that's how they got to the 38 number.
Yeah, we could. I think it would be helpful to have a chart or a spreadsheet that outlines what the current required parking per unit would be, and what the parking per unit would be if it was considered as a total development project. And I apologize, I may have missed this in the materials. I logged in late today to get these materials. So if I'm asking questions that are redundant in the application, I apologize. But for the sake of review, it would be simple to see these two things side by side.
Okay. And just to be clear, the included description here in the narrative this is missing some information that would to answer that question, because I have here the addresses between 255 and 273, their usage is number of units, and then the required parking per those units, and then the administrative adjustment of 15% and a 38 that results from that. So but you were asking for current required parking per unit as a development as well?
Yeah, just something outside the narrative. I think it'll be easier for us to be able to chew on, to be able to see what the actual impacts are side by side.
Okay. So that was the alternatives considered and the character of the neighborhood. So for substantiality, the applicant was asked to state whether that's wrong. The parking would be a substantial deviation from the ordinance, and the applicant indicated the variance could be deemed an insignificant departure, as they could have been allowed had the applicant consolidated the lots.
That's what I'm going for, is what those numbers look like on both sides.
And impact on the environment, the applicant was asked to describe the potential environmental impacts, and the applicant indicated that the proposal would have no negative impact, as the proposed impervious area is 53.9, where 70% is permitted in a mixed-use neighborhood edge.
When they're considering impervious area, I see in their application they say the impervious area on 255 Clinton Avenue.
Yes, they mentioned 255 Clinton Avenue on that one. Yeah.
Right. Is that if these are being considered separately, how are we judging impervious area on a parking lot where the parking lot serves each of the individual buildings?
I believe the portion of the parking lot that is on each lot would be what is counted towards lot coverage. Excuse me.
Okay, we would need that clarity by each lot, because in essence, if there was a lot where they were having 100% lot coverage and another lot where they were having 50%, they would say, okay, between these two lots is 75% lot coverage. But that's, I know I'm using fuzzy math here, but that's not the case, because we'd be creating a non-conforming lot with the lot coverage. Did I lose people? Because I'm not hearing any background.
No, sorry, I was just writing notes.
Okay, good.
No, you're
Just sometimes-
right, Martin, that we should see a description of what the impervious area is per plot.
Right, because they're not
If
consolidating.
they're not going to consolidate it because they don't want to lose their federal money, they don't get to play it both ways.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And I understand the complexity and nature of this. I need to see it spelled out.
So for self-created difficulty, the applicant was asked to state whether the variance would be a self-created difficulty, and the applicant indicated that it could be deemed a self-created difficulty.
One of the other questions I have is, they're building this parking lot across multiple lot lines. Does that create any sort of heartburn for the city administratively as to if things like landscaping or stormwater management are not maintained on a portion of the lot, how they respond to those issues?
I'm not sure. I
That
could
might be a
ask.
planning board question, Martin.
Yeah,
Denard or Tarana, you have any questions?
No, I don't have anything on this one.
Okay.
And that's all for the new cases. And we have a couple of pending business items.
I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Yeah.
This speaks to when we talk about parking lots, we oftentimes have buffer requirements, and when the parking lot is going to span multiple lots, does that not obfuscate the buffer requirements from lot to lot? I mean, I'm just seeing I'm having a hard time.
Martin,
Yeah,
how the parking lot screening requirement should be applied if they're treating it as one big lot, which for
right.
the purposes that they're getting their money, it's not.
Okay.
Right? They have to tell the feds and the state that it is not one big lot, but so at the same time, they're presenting it to us as one big lot, and they want to get the advantages of one big lot.
And I understand that. I just don't want to, I'm thinking a step ahead, where in the sake where let's say we approve this, and then we create a situation where one of these properties defaults, and we've got all of a sudden this crazy situation of one of these lots is all of a sudden the ownership is in question, and we've got a non-conforming site.
Well, I think your point.
Am I thinking too far ahead?
Your point is worth some discussion at the law department, I think. And I would suggest, Luis, if you can ask them how they would address the question of how any applicable parking lot screening requirement should be applied, treating this both as 7 individual lots and as one large lot. And then from the application, it looks like there's a suggestion that the parking lot is going to be used by other people than just the tenants.
Yeah.
And I think they should speak to that issue too, although that's not necessarily dispositive in our review. The last thing I think I would ask is, it appears that their intention is to sell the buildings to separate people and not operate it as one large project. And therefore, the question would be, how are they going to maintain access across all the parking lots for the successors in ownership of the lots? Because if they don't have permanent easements or some kind of other legal impediment, then you could just block people from driving past your part of the lot to get to their house on the end, which I think, as Martin points out, we probably don't like as a city, but that's not necessarily something that we cover as a board.
Wouldn't it be simpler to subdivide the lot? Maybe not, I don't know. Create one lot that's just the parking lot, and then each individual building would be its own entity. I don't know, I'm not.
Not sure if they're permitted.
Trying to wrap my brain around this, so. The parking lot might not even be allowed as a principal use.
Yeah. Okay. We don't have any action on our pending business that I'm aware of. Council, do we have anything that I don't know about?
Not at the moment, although I think, it's potentially it might be resolved by the meeting this month.
And you're talking about Judson?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And as far as Pinewood, which Luis keeps flashing up there, which is the fence case, do you want to talk to us about what our next step should be, Council?
Well, I understand that you guys voted at the last meeting to take up a rehearing on this. It's my opinion that you need to treat it as a request for rehearing, and then that should be noticed like other matters that are pending before the BZA. So I think that you need to have that vote again at the meeting this month.
Is it a request, or is it the board that's making the request for the rehearing?
The statute doesn't like spell these things out in great detail, but I think, in the interests of, just better transparency, I think it makes sense to have it noticed and have it listed as an agenda item.
So what you're saying, Amy, is that by making a motion and voting on it at the last meeting, all the people who would have received a 250-foot postcard for the last meeting about the case didn't get any notice at all the last time. Mm-hmm. And you think that we should give them notice before we take that action at the next meeting?
You guys, if you disagree with me, I'm not sure that I'm gonna fight it too much, but I do think that it's the type of thing that should be noticed separately.
Yeah.
It seems like we would be doing our due diligence by re-noticing people that we're having a rehearing about it.
The notice goes out to the entire public, so it's the city generally. And, I can certainly imagine that the issue of a rehearing, maybe it might not be, that controversial or, important to the public in this particular instance, but it might with respect to, another rehearing in the future. And I think that it's a good thing, just as a matter of procedure, to treat it as something that needs to be noticed.
So next question for you, Amy. If we notice it for the public hearing, that we will entertain a motion and a vote for a rehearing on that case, could we do the rehearing then, or would that also need to be delayed to a next meeting?
The statute, I believe, has it that the application is then put out to the next meeting. Let me look it up quickly.
Okay.
But without looking at the minutes from the last meeting, didn't we take a vote to rehear the case at the last meeting.
You did.
So why would we take up a motion to hear the case if we already acted upon a prior motion?
Well, I'm saying that, you know, the prior motion should have been set for this month as opposed to last month.
Do you have any concerns about giving greater transparency and notice, Martin?
No, I'm just saying we would seem to be replicating a process we already engaged in.
And
It just seems a little bit like,
I mean,
do you know the film
rehearing-
Brazil? You know, it's like we have the ability to take an action to have a rehearing, and we have a mechanism in place to notify the public that we're going to have a rehearing. It just seems unusual to me that we would have a motion to do a rehearing, let the public know we're having a rehearing, have a rehearing to determine whether we want to have a rehearing, and then have a rehearing. If I was a member of the public, I would be very confused about that process.
The whole concept of having a rehearing is inherently redundant, I would say. But the issue, I think, as to why, you know, why these types of rehearings can be controversial and can be actually, you know, a significant public issue is, you know, it kind of has to do with the board establishing precedents, following its precedents. You know, like if you're going to deny something and then immediately change your mind about it, you know, I think these types of situations often they have the potential to, you know, to cause trouble. So I think that in the interests of making sure that the process proceeds, you know, as diligently as possible, I think you notice it, you treat it like it's, you know, you treat the rehearing request like it's, you know, another application. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't want to see the public's faith in us eroded because we just seem to be, I don't know, setting meetings to elect a group of people that are having a meeting. You know what I'm saying? It seems like we've gone through the motions that necessitate transparency as far as why we denied the application, why we felt the rehearing was necessary, that we would notice this correctly, that it would be included in it as an agenda item and people would be re-noticed as part of the hearing process. It seems like we're making those required checks and transparent actions already, and it just seemed rather duplicative of us and potentially confusing to be going through the process of having a hearing to determine if we're having a rehearing. It's not a big deal.
I would always rather err on the side of more transparency and more notice. Because think about it, the number of people that received actual notice when you made the motion for a rehearing was the number of people that were watching, and that's it. When we notice it for a meeting, we notice everybody by mail within 250 feet. It goes on the website, it goes in the newspaper. So there is a stronger attempt to try and give notice to the entire city. And as Amy pointed out, this is the first motion for rehearing and vote that we've done as a board, not just under the new USDO, and you'd have to ask Brad, but I would assume under the last 20 years or so of, you know, the zoning board's activity in Albany. I think if we're going to do a first time action, that more notice is better than less notice.
Okay.
Think about it if you were the person.
I'm not going to die on my sword over having a hearing to determine having another hearing, but it just seems to me that we're sending notice to people twice about the same issue. And if I was the average resident confused about the zoning process, I would be confused about what exactly is.
Yeah.
Well, if I could bring in just another kind of aspect of this situation, I would suggest that having that motion immediately after you voted on the case and decided it that doesn't necessarily give all of the board members a whole lot of time to consider whether or not they would even like to have a rehearing. So I think, to the extent that these things are spaced out a little bit, that gives you guys more time to consider whether you do want to rehear it, or whether there's a better way to approach, a situation. The vote on the rehearing, whether or not to have the rehearing, that has to be unanimous among the board members who are voting. So this is the type of situation where any board member, and I'm not talking about this case specifically, but, as a general matter, if any of the board members thinks that it's, not a useful thing to hold a rehearing, it doesn't go forward. I mean, this isn't in the statute. This is just sort of, I think these are things to consider in terms of how you want to manage the process.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Amy. Do you have any questions, Adriana? You're looking thoughtful.
You're muted.
Sorry.
You're muted again.
You remuted.
Oh,
You're good. You're good.
okay. Sorry. I don't know, part of my laptop is hiding the mute button, which is making it hard to unmute. So I just want to be clear on what the next step for that. So that means at the next meeting in 2 weeks of the board, we will, or should we have I guess now is the opportunity to have a discussion as a workshop, and then at the next meeting, we would take, have further discussion and then take a vote on the rehearing. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, we could do that. Did you want to discuss?
I mean, it seems like after everything that just been said about the process itself, I think, Amy made a point of, or multiple points, but that, there's been a little bit of time since we did go through all of this. And I'm tired tonight, so I don't remember much of where we stood. But so maybe it would be helpful to just, so that at the meeting, we know we've had an opportunity to discuss. And especially, I think, because it felt like part of the decision might have been because of miscommunication, misunderstanding between some of us. So I think maybe it is a good time to talk about it.
Okay.
And like I said, I don't know where to start because I don't remember.
Sure, I might as well start.
I was not prepared for this conversation.
Yeah. I'll start because I was the one that made the motion. My understanding was there was a debate about whether we believed that the record was sufficient to warrant granting a variance. I think there were a couple of board members that felt it was. There were a couple of board members who felt like there were a couple of items that were missing from the application, being alternatives considered, or the potential factors that were taken into consideration to minimize the variance. To my understanding, those were two areas of the application that were not very strong. I think we can all agree on the self-created hardship or the environmental aspects of the application. I personally, given the evidence and the knowledge of the area, would argue that the neighborhood, the impact on the neighborhood or an impact of the environment were not strongly dispositive in the application, given the prevalence of these types of offenses on Hildeberg. But I do think those two areas gave pause, at least to me, that we felt like the application was weak and that the applicant could have done a better job, perhaps presenting those two alternatives. And that's why after the vote was taken for the denial, I asked for I made a motion to rehear it because I felt like there was confusion over the record for the case.
Yeah, and I would agree that I thought the application itself was incomplete. And honestly, the board shouldn't have accepted it until it was completed. Having brought it before us as an incomplete application, we workshopped it and asked the applicant to provide the things that were not done in the application in front of us, and the applicant chose not to do that. We also asked at the public hearing if the applicant would answer those questions, which the applicant appears to have decided not to do or been unable to do. So for me, it was an incomplete application we never should have heard, and then an application and presentation that were insufficient to prove the legal elements that the applicant had to prove to get the grant of a variance. Having said that, I understood your request, Martin, for a rehearing, a motion for a rehearing, was to give the applicant another chance to give us the data to fill in the parts of the application that hadn't been done, and then also to represent. So that's how I thought we left it from that night.
I agree.
Okay. Then circling back briefly to the issue of notice, since the applicant had to give, or the city and the applicant had to give notice to everyone when they were making their entire presentation the first time, and then arguing their case in front of us. That's one of the reasons why I don't have a problem with re-noticing everybody, as opposed to just the 10 people that were watching the zoning board that night. Because I think if the applicant is going to come in and make an entire case, then everyone has a right, at least the way I read the statute.
Yeah,
But having said that, I think Adriana's point that we should talk a little bit about where we left out makes sense to me.
yeah, I didn't mean to characterize that we wouldn't provide notice to the same people who provided notice previously, the people that were living in immediate adjacency of the property. Certainly that would be something that would be noticed when the rehearing came up. I was talking about the noticing of the rehearing to determine whether there was a rehearing was the area where I was confused as to whether it was necessary. So just to clarify.
So to ask the question, did you think that even with the gaps in the application and the presentation, Martin, where they didn't, at least in my mind, didn't prove two of the elements that they needed to prove, you were willing to grant it still despite that?
Yes. Yep.
What convinced
I
you
think because
the-
I had a different understanding of their presentation of alternatives considered, and I don't want to say more depth because we're talking about a judgment. I thought they met the merit for alternatives considered. And I did feel like I had a good understanding of the uniqueness of the situation, given the fact it was a corner lot with a swimming pool, and that there are requirements to have a certain type of fence around a facility like that. I felt like there was not enough of a substantial deviation from the requirement to necessitate a no vote on that.
So given that the swimming pool had a non-palisade fence around it, and the applicant said that she could have retained a non-palisade fence if it wasn't rusty, how did the ask for a palisade fence relate at all to the pool?
No, she was making the case that the current fence is not compliant. The current fence is not a palisade. The current fence is a chain link fence that's not compliant.
Mm-hmm. Where did you, from what part of the application or presentation did you get the idea that swimming pools need palisade fences?
No, swimming pools need fences.
Yeah, and
the applicant was making the case that a swimming pool presents a different sort of privacy interest than a regular backyard.
So you're saying that that was not something that had anything to do with her insurance company or a statute for safety around a pool. She just didn't want people to look at her in the pool.
Sure. Let me put this in context. Most people are asking for a fence in a backyard. It is not any sort of regulatory requirement, correct? They want it and they'll say things like, I have a garden, or I spend time in my backyard, or I have dogs, but there's no regulatory requirement to have a fence whatsoever. It's simply a matter of interest. In this particular case, there is a regulatory requirement to have a fence in the backyard. Now, granted, because the situation is a side lot, front lot, the fence that is required by New York state law to be around a swimming pool, the applicant had desired a fence that was taller, but it wasn't a question of whether they wanted a fence or not. They absolutely must have a fence.
But the statute or the building code only requires a 4-foot fence.
Correct, correct, but it does require a fence. So in this case, the applicant was I'd say the impetus on the applicant was that they had a fence and they wanted to replace an existing fence that was required. So in a lot of circumstances, when we're talking about the benefit of the applicant versus the detriment of the community, I don't think that makes a significant aspect, that makes a significant argument, given the fact that the benefit of the applicant is not substantial because they're required by law to have the fence around the pool.
But the variance, the benefit and detriment that I think you're looking at is the difference between what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Correct. But I'm looking at the fact that they needed to have a fence anyway.
But they don't need to have a fence with 100% opacity. So like you felt that was not substantial, or that was justifiable.
I did not think that was substantial.
100% is not substantial from 60?
I did not think so in this case, no.
Okay.
So I don't know.
I thought the applicant's reasoning for why a 100% opacity fence was justified.
And I think when you right, so for these kind of variances, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you look at all of the requirements, and globally, you don't have to strictly meet each one of them, right? You can admit it's a self-created difficulty.
Yep.
But and so I think the character of the neighborhood really adds a lot of weight. I mean, in that neighborhood, there are so many fences that are exactly like that. I thought she did consider quite a few alternatives. And they were presented, I think, in a way that was maybe not the best way, and some of them were best presentation of alternatives considered. But I thought they did consider alternatives and explained why a lot of them didn't work. And some of them, it was, it doesn't work for us personally, and that's, not acceptable, and I understand that. But some of them that doesn't work because of the way the property is set up. And so that, for me, was sufficient, even if it wasn't perfect. And that's where I meet what Martin was just saying. And then the substantiality, I mean, it is a substantial variance, but it's only one criteria. The environmental impact is low. It's a self-created difficulty, yes. But for me, the character of the neighborhood, it's so much in line with the character of the neighborhood for me, they carried a lot of weight.
So the fences that are there that would make that argument stand, that there was a character of the neighborhood, were those fences allowed after this current ordinance?
No, they were allowed under the current USDO.
They were allowed under the current USDO that they put up privacy.
The prior USDO, they were allowed.
Yeah, not under the existing zoning code, under the old.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And so I guess I understand what you guys are saying, but I would have appreciated an alternative that reduced the ask. So I get it. I heard the argument that the chain link fence doesn't work because the dogs can hurt themselves. I appreciate that. And the argument about the picket fence that the children can reach through. I understand that that's a danger. I guess my concern is well, did you try any other fence? Did you try a fence that had smaller slats, that was not 100%, did not have 100% opacity, but maybe only had 80, but you reduced your ask? And I didn't hear that. And so I don't know if you guys heard something that I didn't hear when I was sitting there. I know I missed the workshop, but I did not hear that. And so if the applicant had come and said, I looked at this fence, it had 70% opacity, but it would have been a financial burden to do that fence, then I would understand that. But okay, you tried, but I just didn't see in the alternatives where a serious alternative was considered that reduced the ask.
And I don't disagree. I think there were weaknesses in the application, but from the presentation, I agreed with the applicant about the reasoning behind wanting a fence with 100% opacity.
Now, remember though, the point that you made, Adriana, that area variances are essentially balancing tests, or totality of circumstances tests. But we do have one element of the elements that we have to look at that is more important than the others, which is we're constrained by state law and the code to grant the least variance possible. So in the end, she didn't show that she was trying to look for the least variance possible. She just said, I want 100% at 6 feet tall. Remember that we've had people that came forward before and said, I got a 5-foot fence. We've had people that said, I got a 4-foot palisade fence with 2 feet of, pickets on the top, or whatever you call those curlicues that you can look through. And none of that stuff was presented to us that would have either showed us that she tried to get down, as Martin said, to 90% opaque or 80% opaque or 70% opaque. And honestly, I mean, the fact that she doesn't want people to look through the top 2 feet of the fence, that's not a proof for me. That's not.
Correct me if I'm wrong, counsel, though, that opaque, if the fence was 4 foot, 100% opaque, it would still not meet. It would still require a variance, and it would require a variance for the extra foot, even if it was opaque, correct?
Luis, do you know?
Yeah, so it's 4 foot tall fencing with 60% maximum opacity. So if they had a 4 foot 100% opacity fence, they would need a variance for the opacity.
And they would need a variance for the additional foot, regardless of its opacity level.
So let's take it one piece at a time, Martin. A 4-foot fence at 100% opacity would be a lesser variance than a 6-foot fence at 100% opacity.
If
right?
I could also interject at this point, there are some pretty specific requirements under the building code that relate to how close slats have to be to each other. So it's possible that, the issue of a 4-foot fence at 100% opacity, that it might not be possible. It might not be possible to do 60% under the building code. I'm not sure, that it's pretty technical, and I haven't seen like a drawing yet as to what type of fence complies with the building code. But I mean, that would be a type of situation where there might not be an alternative because the building code requires, 80 or 90% opacity.
At 4 feet.
I don't know exactly what it works out to, but.
Still a hypothetical though, and the point being that we don't have to make up our mind in advance of what the building code is, or, whether they want to use a 4-foot or a 5-foot or a 6-foot. They need to come in and tell us, and they need to present alternatives that have lesser variances than just saying, I want what I want. 6 foot, 100%, that's it.
I really felt like the applicant, and I guess that's not, but that also, like, she really did not understand, like, what she had not done, I guess. Like what she hadn't, provided. And I think that was part also of, I guess, like, I don't think, and I would be curious to see actually, the reaction if we said, 100% opacity is too much. You need to consider, a less substantial request, which are we allowed to do that? I can't remember. I feel like we've done that in the past, suggested to an applicant, like, that they lower the, like I think it was like one of the cases on Broadway, we suggested a way that, or an option that, or I think maybe at the workshop we had talked about it and they came back with like a third option that reduced, I guess.
At the workshop.
Okay, so at the workshop, but I think because she attended the workshop, but still didn't, clearly from the meeting, she still didn't understand what we were saying. So like, I just feel bad. Yes.
So Adriana, I agree with you that she appeared either to not know or to not care. One or the other, and that doesn't matter to me. We asked staff at the workshop to communicate with her and tell her what she needed to do. And, for whatever reason, that didn't happen. So, and that was actually why I voted in favor of a rehearing, because that gives staff a chance to talk to her and tell her what she needs to do. And she needs to fill out the application properly and make a case for why she wants a larger variance than other options might have presented to us. And that didn't happen the last time. This gives her a chance to do it. I'm fine with that.
Especially because I think I remember her saying that she didn't get notice of the meeting until the night before the meeting.
Yeah. And Brad admitted that he hadn't talked to her in between the workshop and the meeting.
Something I'm going to be brutally honest, something I've struggled with is the minimum variance necessary. And oftentimes I see it as a relief valve between the benefit to the applicant and a detriment to the community. And I think sometimes I worry that an applicant comes in with, and not in this case, but let's come up with a hypothetical scenario where an applicant comes in for, and it's going to be a little bit crazy, a 15-foot fence, right? Mm-hmm. We say, we're looking at the guidance and the application, you are required to minimize the variance, and you end up with what appears on paper to be a minimizing of the variance to a, let's say, a 7-foot fence. When in reality, the applicant may never have been considering a 15-foot fence based upon financial or aesthetic or personal reasons, but the minimizing of the variance is almost like a horse trading or a negotiation tactic. To my understanding, it's not supposed to be a negotiation tactic, but how is the board entitled to understand the difference between an ask to arrive at what appears to be a minimized variance or a genuine ask where the applicant comes in and says, in this particular case, I did consider the applicant's words, a 6-foot fence, and in an effort to minify, which is a standard size fence, and in an effort to minimize the variance, I am proposing a 5-foot fence.
So I think you have a good question, Martin, and let me answer it like this. And I would suggest that we might also want to, if you're really concerned about this, we should reach out to Chris Eastman at the state and local government support area at the Department of State in their zoning area. But the first thing that's supposed to happen when someone proposes to build a 15-foot fence, because they don't ever want anyone on the second floor even to look at their property, is that the inspector, the building inspector, is supposed to go out there and take a look. Mm-hmm. And they're supposed to tell you what the law is. You got 6 feet. I want 15. Too bad, you're not going to get it. If you want to try and get a variance, put in an application. Then what happens is a variance is supposed to be looked at closely by the planning department. And
Yep.
And if there's 15 foot, you should get a no. And that didn't happen in this case. But in most cases, we don't get cases coming in where someone says, I want 15, but I'll take 7. Like
you mean a no as in I refuse to bring this case before the board?
You can't get that. It's against the law. And you were told on the application, Martin, and have you ever filled out an application?
Of course. But
and the application gives you the legal standards, one of which is the board grants the least variance possible.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
But you just, can we go back to what you said? You said they'll bring it to staff. They'll bring denial from the building department to staff and say, I would like to apply to appeal the building department's decision.
No, you come to them and you say, I want 15 feet. And
Correct.
They say, no.
But we don't hear those cases.
Tuck it through. No, we don't. But
we hear appeals cases, right?
But Martin, that's why we don't get the 15-foot fence coming in front of us. We never have.
But the applicant has the ability to come before us with that type of.
Okay. Well, let's assume you're hypothetical and someone
We've,
came
we've
forward.
definitely heard those cases. I mean, we have a case before us where the applicant would like to go from 3, which is part of the application, to 38 spaces.
Yeah.
That is a magnitude expansion upon what's allowed. So it's a circumstance where staff felt okay, or the applicant felt it was appropriate to bring that application before, despite the fact that that's a very substantial variance. I understand staff's role in working with an applicant to minimize the variance, but if an applicant is headstrong about coming to us with a extraordinary variance request, they have every right to do so.
And I would vote every time you get what you get. You can say you want a 20-foot fence. And as far as I'm concerned, if you don't give me an alternative with the
Right.
least possible variance, you ain't gonna get it.
Right, but my question goes back to the applicant put on the record, I considered a 6-foot fence, and I decided on a 5-foot fence to minimize the variance. So my question back was, how much evidence do we typically rely on for a minimizing of the variance? Is it evidence that's entered as part of the application, or is it a deviation from the application that's agreed upon during a workshop or a hearing?
You know, I'll just say I don't think it has. If someone comes in with a ridiculous, I think that your hypothetical is ridiculous. A ridiculous ask. I don't. Okay, well, you went from ridiculous to still off the code, and we're going to allow it because you went less than ridiculous. No, you're looking at the standards that are set in law. The standard is 4 feet.
Yep.
You're saying if you want something higher, that's fine. Explain to me why you need higher. I get the height. She has a pit bull. They're dangerous dogs. They could probably jump over that fence easily. I get the height. I'm saying you need to present to me an argument that says you consider things that are feasible, and this is the best that you can do. If you come back and say, you know, I was going to go for a fence with smaller slats that would have allowed for 70% opacity, but it didn't meet the building code. Okay, now you've made a case. And I'm saying, okay, well, I understand the case that you're making. I'm not saying that I hate solid fences, even though I kind of do, but I'm not saying I hate them. I'm simply saying that it is your job as an applicant to come and make a case. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like the case is made. And so, like,
right.
Even these ridiculous examples, like, is not making the case either. It's just, the standard is the law.
Well, I came up with the example to be illustrative of the type of we were talking about, because we were going back around the bend about minimizing the variance. That was Adriana's question. What evidence is necessary to minimize a variance? Is the evidence pre-application, or is the evidence a willingness by the applicant to minimize the variance during the workshop or board procedures?
I think minimum is close to what is allowable as you can. That's what I tend to think of. You're getting as close to what is allowable as you can.
I'll answer that question a little bit differently, Martin. We have a set of procedures for the board that says if you don't give us additional things for the record at least 48 hours ahead of time, it can't be considered at the meeting. And that's so that everybody that is in the 250-foot zone gets a chance to look. So between the workshop and the meeting, as we frequently ask people, when we say we don't have evidence in this application of someone trying to minimize a variance, Luis, please reach out to them and ask them to put in evidence of minimizing the variance. That would come to us in a letter, hopefully 48 hours before the meeting. If someone comes in front of us and we're discussing, they present and, you know, we're saying, did you try to lower the variance? And the person say, no, maybe I can. Then we hold the case over, as we've done before, the guy with the 5-foot fence. He came in and met with staff. He presented a 5-foot fence, and then it came back later and we approved it. So I'm not sure what your question is.
The question was, when we had received testimony from the applicant as far as what their efforts were to minimize the variance, it entered into record by their testimony, answers the question on a piece of paper, that they originally had looked at a 6-foot fence, but determined a 5-foot fence was closer to the requirement that didn't require as substantial a deviation. And that was their response as far as minimizing the variance.
So are you asking, would we, on a verbal assertion at a hearing, I thought about 5 foot, can you grant it? We're constrained to grant their application too. The application is what makes the record. not
So,
what they say in front of us.
so going back to my question, I just don't want to set us up for a circumstance or have a circumstance where people are proposing what we would call the ridiculous in order to game us to reduce the variance based upon what might be an agreement during a workshop or an application process. And that is just my fear.
Well, if you believe that's true, I think that a robust review process before the application gets to us, and before it is accepted by staff, is important. But I honestly think for myself, if someone came in and suggested a fence 4 times the code height, and then came in and said, well, I'll cut it down to 3.5 times, that's a no. It's not the least variance possible.
So wait, Richard, are you saying that if are you saying the planning board is authorized, has the authority to prevent someone from submitting an appeal to the BZA? So if there's a ridiculous application to appeal, it should not even come, the planning board should just put it in the trash and not tell us?
No, not even in the slightest. What I'm saying is that we should never, and this is what I told Brad 6.5 years ago, no matter what the board did in the past, I will not accept an incomplete application. And I'm going to have that conversation with Brad and with Chris again. We used to accept incomplete applications, and then, that is not we, but the previous board, and then let them sit for up to 2 years in the pending agenda while they were waiting for people to put in the remaining parts of the application. And I said, no, we're not going to accept those, because the board was getting a lot of pressure and getting a bad reputation from the developer community and the neighborhoods about having things on its agenda for 2 years when we're constrained by statute to act upon a case that comes in front of us within 62 days unless it is agreed upon by all parties to be extended. I didn't want to have to do that anymore. We were also, before I took over as chair, not referring cases that are required by the general municipal law to go to the county planning board because they didn't want to slow things down. I said, no, we're gonna send everything. Everything that qualifies goes. And so we've gotten to a place where we're not perhaps being as sharp on that as we need to be. But the planning department and the chief planning officer absolutely have the right to not accept an incomplete application. And if someone comes in with an application and they have the 16-foot fence, while staff is reviewing it, they can say, by the way, you know that the board is only allowed to grant the least possible variance, and 15 feet is not the least possible variance compared to 4 feet, but you're welcome to make that argument if you want.
Yeah, I think I can recall circumstances where staff has entered testimony that they advised the applicant that it was unlikely that the board would ever entertain a variance. I think we had a request for a parking lot in Center Square where the applicant was trying to make the case that the parking lot was at one time an accessory use to a car garage, and therefore it qualified as a parking lot when it was actually parking for the actual garage or cabinet maker, and staff was happy about entering the record that they advised against an application like that.
Yeah, that was on Jefferson Street in the 70s.
Yeah, ultimately, I think no matter if an application is ridiculous or not, staff can't prevent the application if it's an appeal from having its day in court, so to speak. But
no,
I do,
as long as the appeal is properly taken,
yeah.
Means a complete application, hand it in the right amount of, hand it in, the fees paid,
Yeah.
we'll hear it. But
And I think in this case there was more work to be done in the application. I could see through the missing pieces to put a puzzle together, and I certainly understand that may not be the case for everybody, and that's why I'm glad that it's going to be reheard. But
that's actually one of those things that we're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to make the case for the applicant.
And I was clarifying with the applicant what the case was.
Martin, can I finish?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not supposed to read past the 4 corners of the application and the evidence that's put in front of us.
I don't think that was the case.
Yeah.
So just for my clarity on process, so next meeting we're gonna vote on the rehearing, and then that goes at that point, then we'll have a workshop. And so, one of the issues is the incompleteness of the application, I think.
Mhm.
So I mean, we can't go back to I guess we're not going back to the step where the planning board is working, because it's already an application kind of in front of us. So I guess at the workshop, we have to address those issues in a way, and that will give, I mean, the applicant ample time, which they didn't get last time, partially because of the city's fault. You know, so that will give the applicant the full, with time, opportunity to try and understand that and add additional information to address the incompleteness issues. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would like planning staff to reach out to the applicant for the fence case tomorrow,
Okay.
because we've had now 6 weeks
Yeah.
that the planning staff could have talked to this lady and have helped her to understand what she needed to do so she could put her best case forward, because that's what applicants are supposed to do.
Yeah.
And that gives us a chance to actually act at the public hearing meeting if we so choose. Because there's nothing in the statute that says that we can't, as long as we properly notice the actions, it doesn't mean that Martin can't make another motion.
Oh, at the next meeting, you're saying. So at the next meeting, we can do the motion to rehear, and then rehear, and then make a motion to make a decision on the case at the same meeting.
Yeah, I don't believe that there's anything in the statute that keeps us from doing that. It's
Okay.
probably not contemplated to happen that way, but I don't know if there's a complete prohibition. Am I wrong on that, Amy?
Hold on a second.
Sorry.
You're killing her.
Perfect time.
That's cool. Sorry, I should apologize to everyone who's got sick.
Hold on a second. It's 81A. So it's only a couple of sentences long. The way that it's phrased is, I'll just read you the whole thing. A motion for the zoning board to hold a rehearing to review any order, decision, or determination not previously reheard may be made by any member of the board. A unanimous vote of all members of the board then present is required for such rehearing to occur. Such rehearing is subject to the same notice provisions as an original hearing. Upon such rehearing, the board may reverse, modify, or annul its original order, decision, or determination upon the unanimous vote of all members then present, provided the board finds that the rights vested in persons acting in good faith in reliance upon the reheard order, decision, or determination will not be prejudiced thereby. So, I mean, it mentions notice specifically, but it doesn't really explain what, does it have to be the rehearing, or is it the request for the rehearing that has to be noticed?
I would have a broad notice for that, which would be that the board will take up a motion, and I'm assuming you're going to make a motion again, Martin, but that the board will take up a motion for rehearing of case, I forgot what the number was, at the meeting of the 28th, and upon upon the passage of the motion, the board may act to approve, reverse, or modify. And that would probably meet all of our notice requirements for anyone acting in reliance upon a denial at the last meeting. Or we could get sued for detrimental reliance, which would be kind of cool. I've never been in one of those suits.
Okay, so I guess, Louis, I just want to make sure you're good with everything. Like, it is kind of I feel like it's a very simple case, but it's also complicated. Like, the situation we're in is complicated a little bit. And I think both the issues and the rehearing part. So Louis, I guess you can work with Amy on the notice to make sure the notice is good enough. But Louis, you're good with the notice, and are you good with also what the applicant needs to know?
Yeah, I think the shortcoming in the application was clearly identifying both the benefit of the fence from what we discussed last time, not just the actual variance request, but the benefit of the variance that the applicant is seeking to obtain, and then walking through that benefit and how there is no other option but this 6 or 5 foot 100% opacity fence to meet that benefit. How a 4 foot 90% opacity fence could not meet that benefit. So I think that's kind of what I've already explained to the applicant in a correspondence I think about last week or a week and a half ago. So I'll follow up with the applicant to make sure that they're aware that the board intends to have a rehearing of the case for the 28th and may take action on that and to prepare a presentation that meets those deficiencies.
Yeah, I think the two areas were the alternatives considered and the minimization of the variance.
And I think I think in a way, and I think part of the confusion is she's looking at it as one fence, one variance, but really she's asking for two variants. There's a height one, and then there's a transparency one. And I think it would be easier for everyone if she kind of splits that up. I mean, that's my personal, like, I guess we don't need to give her advice, but after all of this, I feel like that's part of why we were all so confused too.
I don't think we're giving advice. I think we're trying to get to some point of clarity.
Well, and remember that staff acquainting an applicant with the options that they have is different from us giving advice. The board members at it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I thought this was a really interesting conversation. So thank you, everyone. I think at the end of last meeting, I think at times I was grasping what was going on, but at times then it would escape my mind and I would not be sure what was happening. And I'm sure that's if I felt that way, the applicant must have been like, I don't understand what's happening. But so I think this conversation was helpful both on the process and on the substance of the issues.
Good, good. And some of the people who are still watching us, I think there's still 3 people watching.
They're like, what are these guys talking about?
One of them texted me and said, I can't believe you spent all this time talking about a fence.
That's what we do. When people go, what do you do on the Board of Zoning Appeals? I go, fences, signs, sometimes a building.
But I think it's really interesting. Like, it's not about the fence itself. It's about like what we do on a bigger level, I think.
No,
and how we do it.
I think it's a responsibility to the public and to an applicant that we have due diligence in our consideration. We have thorough deliberations about these things, and that's why I appreciate being on the board. What a terrible place to live in, where people just go, what color is it? It's blue. Okay, fine. Without asking the deeper question of, well, why does it need to be that way? Your government should be responsive and thoughtful, and I think that's what we're doing.
Were you going to let young people live upstairs? No. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Have a good
Bye,
night.
everybody.
See you in 2 weeks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Amy.